Hey guys, appreciate you tuning in. Today's topic will be the subject line of today's conversation will be one of the most controversial things in competitive bass fishing as we know it today, and that's forward facing sonar. Why am I doing this video? Well, one, it helps me with the use of the GoPro, helps me with the use of YouTube posting, helps me memorialize moments that my grandchildren will have a chance to go back and look at. So the thing with the grandchildren, of course, is if I live fortunate enough to live long enough and get them outdoors, then we can share the intrinsic value that comes with being one with nature. And if I don't, if I never get the chance to get them out as often as I would like, certainly there are things about your childhood that you don't remember. So this gives me the opportunity to memorialize that, and they'll have the chance to go back and look and see what their grandfather was interested in, what he did and what he loved to do, and all of those things. So I'm fortunate enough to have a wife that helps me stay grounded in some of the thoughts that I have related to a number of topics, but this one in particular, forward-facing sonar. And I love her to death, and good Lord, she's had to endure many evenings worth of conversations over beverages of our choice. And she probably knows more about forward-facing sonar than any wife in Onslow County. So I certainly appreciate that she's helped me stay grounded and given me many of, I won't say argumentative, but certainly many opportunities to look at things different ways. And over our conversation last night, I think what we both came to conclude was forward-facing sonar and the controversy that can really be broken into two lanes. First lane, of course, is competition. Competition is everything from the boater's use to viewership to the co-angler's use, the advantage that it gives to a boater versus the disadvantage of maybe the older angler. So I'll try to talk a little bit about that on the competition side here in just a few moments. The other lane to be discussed is conservation. And that, in fact, may be where the real issue with forward-facing sonar lies. And we may not know until some time when there is a connection between the major fishing brands of Major League Fishing and BASS and some of the states that they're competing in, and whether or not the Department of Natural Resources has found ways to capture empirical data that would make argument that forward-facing sonar is doing more damage to the natural resource than it's giving to the value of competitive fishing. That'll be up for them to decide. So we'll spend some time talking about both of those. So again, I appreciate you tuning in to watch, and let's get into our first line of conversation, and that's competition. So in the subject of competition, what is it doing good for competition, or what is it doing bad for competition? Certainly there are guys who are very good at this scoping thing, and then there are guys who aren't so good at scoping. And maybe there's a divide there based on age. The guys who are good at it probably are at a younger age, where they've had the fortunate opportunity to be a part of a growing trend in technology as it relates to gaming and those types of things. So it's less intimidating, easier for them to understand as it relates to what they see on the screen and the geometry out in front of them. So probably much easier to use for those guys. The older guys, the older anglers, have found that most of them probably feel like that they're kind of backed into a corner. Since there's no regulation yet on the use of it in competitive angling, they're backed into a corner where they feel like that they have to invest in all these additional dollars to add this capability. And when I say add this capability, right, you're not going to buy generally speaking, you're not going to buy a bass boat off of the showroom floor today that don't have some form of forward-facing sonar, whether it's the Lowrance version or the Garmin version or the Humminbird version. But these guys are spending upwards of $50,000 adding additional transducers in the back, 2 on the trolling motor, 1 over maybe by the console. So for some of them, it probably feels like it's gotten ridiculous and way out of control. But what do you do at this point, man? You've kind of put the toothpaste on the counter. You've let it out of the tube. So how do you manage and regulate that if you're one of those major competitive bodies of Major League Fishing or BASS? Viewership, what's it done for viewership? Again, it'll be up to those major bodies to determine that, and you've got to believe they track it because it's a television show and it produces money. So I'm quite certain that they have ways to track whether there's increased viewership or decreased viewership. You see so many comments and so many positions of people who simply just don't want to watch it because they don't want to watch the back of someone looking down at a screen, picking fish off in what the term they're using, playing a video game. I've heard people use the term they're spotlighting bass, and you can put that equation or that analogy against spotlighting deer and the disadvantage the deer has over the person using the spotlight. So I'm sure they're keeping track of viewership and what it is or isn't doing in terms of adding new viewers or taking away some of those that watched it for the simple intrinsic value of watching an angler catch a fish, just using basic natural talent and technique. The co-angler, the co-angler has felt, I'm sure many of them have felt like they are at a disadvantage, especially when they're paired with a boater who uses it well. They feel like they're fishing in waters that aren't fertile for them. So many of them have probably considered ways that they can bring along their own forward-facing sonar capability, and that'll be an interesting topic to explore when we see more of it happening and the dilemma and conversation between the boater and the non-boater in terms of how it's stored, how it's managed, and how you travel with it as you're moving about in your tournament day. So that's the competition side. Again, you can spend hours talking about different, tentacles in the competition side of forward-facing sonar and what it is or isn't doing for the sport. And I'm not trying to sway or persuade an opinion one way or the other. I'm just telling you what I think. And you'll probably hear those same thoughts in many other videos that have been produced regarding this particular topic. So there might be lots to be said about the impacts of forward-facing sonar and the efforts to conserve the resource that we use in both competition and the intrinsic value we get with the therapeutic aspects of being outside and fishing. I think hours could be spent on the conservation side, and quite frankly, that's probably where most of the time should be spent. But who's the right parties to have that conversation? Well, certainly your Department of Natural Resources for each state, and then you have, I would assume, there's some folks within each of the branded organizations of Major League Fishing and BASS that are a part of the conservation efforts for each one of those organizations. So combining the states that they compete in with those particular people within those two brands, there has to be some conversation. If it's not happening now, it certainly needs to happen. Those branded organizations have a responsibility to protect and conserve this resource. The competitive angler has the responsibility to protect and conserve the resource, as does the state. The angler oftentimes gets caught up in just the competition aspect of this and trying to catch fish. And I can appreciate that. But you're trying to catch fish that you wouldn't have caught or wouldn't have been fishing for a number of years ago. We can say all day long that forward-facing sonar has taught us so much about what we didn't know about bass behavior, and you can make an argument that that's true. You could also make the argument that it hadn't necessarily taught us anything different about what they do. We just have visibility to it now, so we're able to adjust to it. Fish have always chased a lure and turned away. Forward-facing sonar allows us to see that fish chase that lure and turn away, and has allowed us to make adjustments to our presentation to catch a fish that we wouldn't have otherwise fished for a second cast. So you certainly can't turn away from the responsibility to protect this resource. And if we don't start thinking about conservation, what will it look like 10, 15 years from now when forward-facing sonar technology has advanced, astronomically from where it's at today to where it will be 10, 15 years from now? So we certainly got to consider it. Those governing bodies at the industry brands of MLF and BASS and the states got to get together. They got to talk about what the future looks like and what efforts each one of those organizations need to do to help protect the resource. I mean, the angler has always believed that I'm going to catch the fish I catch. I'm either going to bring them back to the weigh-in scales, and because I'm participating in that organization's event, those fish get turned over to that organization and released. So maybe the angler today believes that they're doing enough to conserve that resource, and I'm not prepared to make an argument against that. I mean, we do what the organization tells us to do in terms of the rules and regulations for that particular event that we're participating in. So a lot of this will fall at the state level with the Department of Natural Resources and their communication and their collaboration with MLF and BASS. But we owe it to the species to protect and conserve it. All right, guys, in closing, I'd like to say that if you stuck around long enough to watch, I appreciate it. Dude, as a Marine, I took my box of crayons and I chewed on them for a while. I broke some up and I scribbled on a piece of paper with some of it and used those crayons to put together at least some line of conversation with where my mind is at with forward-facing sonar. And I didn't just think these things up overnight. I've done a lot of, like I said before, I've done a lot of review of other folks' social media and YouTube and various other articles and stuff that's out there and available to the public. Man, I would just say that we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to the integrity of the sport to protect in any way that we can the resource that we're using right now to provide us that therapeutic value, whether that's the excitement of competitive fishing or whether that's the recreational side of fishing that you just go out and you simply enjoy being connected and enjoy being on the hunt for one of nature's creatures. Whether you're using forward-facing sonar or not, there's a level of excitement that we enjoy from that. So do your part one way or the other, man. Be safe out there on the water. We will continue to try to put together some additional content here in regards to upcoming events and how we might prepare for those and stuff like that. So again, I appreciate you hanging out with me. If you don't mind, if you liked what you heard or saw, click the like button, subscribe if you like the broken crayon theories of this type of stuff, because that's what us Marines do, man. We break up a bunch of crayons, chew on some, and spit them out and move them around on a piece of paper and see what happens. So, hey, I appreciate it, guys. Till next time, we'll see you on the water.